Indian intel reports, but also the UN reporting that Pak-based terror groups now joining hands and ranks with the Taliban is a concern. Is that a real concern for India?
Look, Geeta, there were a very large number of Pak nationals who you call them foreign fighters, call them terrorists. They were there. I mean, it's not something I need to say. There are UN reports which speak about them, okay, and speak about them in the thousands. Now, again, you don't need to believe me. Look at some of the debates which are taking place even in the United States, in the Congress, congressional hearings, questions being asked saying what was the role of Pakistan at this point of time in that situation. And you've seen the responses from the American administration, which are very telling. So things are happening there. I mean, the role of Pakistan in what happened in Afghanistan is not a secret. I mean, it is very, very public. It is more public now because even they now speak about many of these things. So obviously that is a concern for the entire neighborhood. I mean, for the whole region.
Minister Jaishankar, staying with Pakistan for a moment, there's been a ceasefire between the two sides since February this year. The ceasefire violations themselves, as a result, have gone down, but there are still infiltrations happening. Dialogue hasn't been happening between the two sides for a while now. Could you give us a perspective of your vision of when you think things might sort of get back on track? We know about a probable back channel and things like that, but is it something that's foreseeable, sir? India and Pakistan talking to each other again?
By the way, I mean, the sense we don't talk is a bit exaggerated. They have an embassy. We have an embassy. I mean, our foreign ministry talks to the embassy, their foreign ministry talks to our embassy. So it's not like there is no communication. I mean, diplomats have continued to do what diplomats are supposed to do. I think the issue which you are, in a sense, pointing to was the fact that previously there was a beyond the routine diplomacy engagement on a certain set of issues. Now, this is not new. Some years ago, 2016 to be precise, the starting from Pathankot and then culminating at Uri, events went in a direction which made it very difficult to continue with that particular mode of engagement. And at the end of the day, there is a big question which all of us need to ask ourselves. When you say, when do you see that coming back? You tell me, when do you see Pakistan becoming a normal country? And for me, a normal country is a country which doesn't sponsor and execute terrorism against its neighbors, which trades with its neighbors on a MFN basis, which has connectivity with its neighbors, which allows people to move on the basis of visas, I mean, the way we do with all our other neighbors. I mean, if I look at a Bangladesh or a Nepal or a Sri Lanka or a Maldives, the question is, when do I have something similar with Pakistan? Now, right now, obviously the prospects don't look good, because the bottom line is that it is the not just the only one of our neighbors. You know, there are very, very few, I mean, to my mind, actually no other situation in the world today where a country actually runs this kind of scale of terrorism against the neighborhood.
Minister, what's your reading of the state of play with China? We've seen a massive military build-up, which seems to continue infrastructure projects, bringing in air assets, pumping up air defenses. We've tried to cope up as best as possible, given the asymmetry in our economic and military capabilities. However, things aren't quite as bad as they were immediately after Galwan, but they haven't completely come back to normal either. As External Affairs Minister, how do you read what's happening on the other side of the Himalayas?
Well, the way I read it is that we, from the 1980s, I think developed a workable decent relationship with the Chinese, predicated on the fact that there would be peace and tranquility in the border areas. This was not just an assumption or a conversation, it was written into agreements between us. Now, come 2020, we saw the Chinese side disregard those agreements for reasons which are still not clear to us, because I've met my counterpart a number of times, and others in our system have engaged each other. But I've still not heard a credible explanation as to why they chose to bring that size of forces to that sector of our border. Now, if peace and tranquility is disturbed, then attempts are being made to change the LAC, the status quo, unilaterally, and large forces are brought to the border in contravention of written agreements, then obviously the relationship will be impacted. Now, if we need to get back to a normal relationship, which they say that they want, and which both of us believe is in our mutual interest, then I think they need to stick with the agreements and do the right things. Now, we've had, yes, some progress. We've had progress in Pangong So, we've had progress in a few other areas. But I think the larger problem remains, which is that there is a very sizable Chinese force very close, close if not at the LAC.
Dr. Jaishankar, it's not so much the achievements of Modi administration in international affairs, but it's the difficulties in relations that finds a lot of space in domestic politics. Now, we've seen Rahul Gandhi walk out of the Parliamentary Committee on Foreign Relations when it comes to discussions on China, demanding that there needs to be discussion. There has been a lot of talk from the opposition on whether if the government has been transparent enough. Just wanted to know whether if there is a sense in the government in briefing the opposition of the difficulties that the government faces or the difficulties that the government now faces with China, and whether if the government indeed has been transparent with the country and with the opposition.
Look, I've been in the government a long time, a really long time, and over multiple governments. I think, governments, obviously when it comes to national security situations, all governments, when it comes to national security situations, say enough so that, people outside the government have a fair sense of what is happening, and expect that people outside there will be supportive of larger national objectives and goals. Now, if sometimes it doesn't happen because people are busy politicking, I just have to say it's a very sorry state of affairs. But I don't think, just look back at the last year and a half. We know so much about what is happening out there. So nobody can say, oh, I have not been told enough, or there's been lack of briefing. I mean, I don't know the standing committee episode that you're referring to, but I can tell you, for example, as a foreign minister, we have a consultative committee, and this issue has been discussed. So it's been discussed in Parliament. Raksha Mantri has given repeated statements. So I think somewhere we need a sense of responsibility and maturity when it comes to national security matters. It should not be a subject for posturing.
Minister, staying with China, from the political part of it, just going back to the LAC for a moment, there have, as you no doubt know, there have been multiple rounds of talks, over a dozen rounds of talks between the corps commanders. You've met your counterpart a few times. There's a question of the return to status quo of April 2020, and there is also a sense that the Chinese are there in large numbers, they're talking to us, but there's no sign of any really big disengagement. Have things changed on the ground, sir? Is there a realization that this situation is becoming a kind of semi-permanent foreseeable future kind of situation where we have to live with the Chinese in large numbers at our doorstep?